It's pretty obvious over there. Yeah, and even grannies do their shopping on bikes in Holland. So it's a different world. It's a hugely different culture, and one reason I love Amsterdam is I'm going to get flattened by a bike rather than a car. You know, I just prefer it that way. So it's a tremendous challenge. Actually, a lot of these issues were raised in Foresight, the obesity report that many of you will know. It was about environment and changing the environment. And a lot of this material is in the strategy. It's in the physical activity strategy for England, and it's in the obesity strategy. The problem is political. You know, it's getting people out of cars and getting politicians to really go for it. That's the problem. And I noticed the latest manifesto suggests that the Tories, the Alliance, is not going to really push people out of their cars. It's moving backwards rather than forwards, whereas a lot of good stuff was starting to happen with active travel to school, more cycle paths, active travel schemes around cities. You know, things are home zones. We've copied from Denmark and in Bristol, and 20-mile-an-hour limits are in place. So those things are being trialled, but to get it as a cultural shift means people have got to give up their cars to some extent, and politicians are not ready to take that on board yet.
And just to add to that point, we discussed it at length on the physical activity guidelines with the NICE committee, and I started to get involved in some of the latter meetings and trying to be quite maverick to say, okay, well, let's ban car journeys for anything less than a mile, and we'll have members of staff from the school stood there with Alsatian dogs stopping parents from driving past. We'll get guns out, we'll do the lot, whatever it takes to stop them and make them actually walk. But it is a huge societal issue. Yeah. And unfortunately, it takes me for a 9-minute journey to get across Manchester in the morning. I've got to try and get past about 15 Mitsubishi Shoguns full of obese kids. Fantastic.
I mean, any other panellists? I talked earlier, didn't I, Anne Milton's challenge around public health and plead for it to be a cross-departmental approach. Mike, I remember when you and I were sitting on the 5-hour strategy delivery board and trying to get Department of Transport to those meetings was pretty tough, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is for politicians to take the lead on this, and I fear that we may be moving backwards, not forward on it. The only glimmer of hope is, and it's a sport rather than a transport, is that one of the things I think will be set up for the very first time is a cabinet committee, a star chamber for sport, which will bring together for the very first time Department of Health, Department for Education, DCMS, Culture, Media and Sport. Transport will be included in this. There's been goes at trying to do that before, and it is all about the political will, and it comes down, I guess it comes down to us all as citizens lobbying our politicians, lobbying and challenging that, but I'm not sure there's going to be a change too soon.
We're going my top left, or middle left.
Hello, I'm Clive Andrews. I'm from Bike Club, which is the children's young people's cycling project that's kindly funded by ASDA that Paul alluded to earlier. So thanks for the support there, Paul. My question, just by chance, I suppose, segues from the last one. There's been a lot of talk about play today. There's been a lot of talk about young people on bikes, children playing on bikes, children playing out on their way to school, from school. A lot of talk about school. There's been mentions of 10-year-old children of year 6. I'm just imagining that the inevitable fact that children become teenagers become adults, lifestyles then change quite dramatically. And I'm just wondering if the panel have any thoughts about what happens when that lifestyle change does happen, and how the good stuff we're talking about in terms of play and this activity being the stuff of childhood, how much of it then gets carried into adulthood, and what can be done to maximise that and ensure that these good practices don't just stay, yeah, when I was a kid I was quite active, but now look, I hit 17, got a driving licence, got a job and a busy lifestyle, and here I am in my 20s and it's all gone downhill.
Yeah, sustainable participation. Who wants to have first crack?
Should I kick off on that? And I don't certainly have an answer to drop off, which is an age-old issue. What I think we do know is that if you have transitioned a youngster into community sport or into regular exercise and really by the start of secondary, so 11, 12, 13, if you get them used to making choices themselves to do that, they do carry on with sport. There is still a drop-off at 16, far too big, and we're testing out with 9 sports, if we can come up with a solution to what has been a historic 20, 30 year problem. But I think it is about transitioning youngsters into making those choices for themselves.
Jonathan, no Alsatian dogs in this answer.
No. That, sir, is the $1 million question. And a constant challenge. But I think it's absolutely, from our perspective, about education. And, from minute one, when you're actually interacting with young people, it's about physical activity. So what we're about is saying to them, physical activity is walking the dog, washing the car, going to the shops. That's physical activity. And yes, it might be football, rugby, aerobics, parkour, free running, but all of that gets into the mix. So then when you start to try and look at, well, what's the research out there? What are we asking people to do now? What are government coming down and saying, right, it should be, 30 minutes a day, an hour's worth of vigorous activity, or that activity needs to be vigorous. Whatever the guidelines are and become over the coming months, it's about saying, well, actually, how can you put that together as a young person and continue to achieve that in a wide variety of what you actually do, so it doesn't become something that's, oh, well, I must go out and play football now for 20 minutes. It's a case of, well, can I put all of this together? Can I walk to school? Can I be involved in a lunchtime recess class, whatever it might be? And education's the absolute key part of it. Physical activity is wide and diverse, and it's not about how well you can curl a free kick into the top corner of a goal.
Any other panellists want to have a go?
Yeah, just
Ken,
a quick one.
take it away.
I think it's a lot of it's been said today. I think they will learn skills while they're doing play. In the early years, climbing trees and jumping and testing each other out. That's what kids do when they're out the range of adults. They do physical things, particularly boys. And I think you learn a lot of physical skills from that. We need a lot more teaching of elementary skills in primary schools. We need to teach parents how to play with children when they're younger, when they're infants, as Paul said. That's the basis behind physical skills and physical self. And you would hope that in the process you've convinced them as well that activity is important. So it's that competence thing on the one side and it's the is it worth it thing on the other side that you would hope that they take into adolescence and they find a way through that. Because I think if you haven't won that battle by the time kids are 13 or 14, you've got an uphill battle ahead. Some people do come back into it despite what's happened to them as kids, and you can reclaim people as such. But generally, the patterns are laid down early on through physical competence and convincing kids that physical activity is really important in whatever form.
I just had another thought there. I think there's a non-significant group of kids that actually want to be active and enjoy sport, but have never had the confidence or the opportunity to try it. So we see kids who, the work we do is around multi-skills activities. So it's not just burning calories or doing sport. It's about improving their kind of balance, their agility, their coordination. So when they do try sport, they're not the ones coming last. So sometimes it's not about the fact that kids don't want to do sport. It's just that they don't have the confidence in their own abilities to actually not necessarily be the best, but not to be the worst. And I think the whole area of behavior change is really about if you can instill healthy behaviors at a young age, you're much more likely to kind of see those behaviors being kind of transferred into adolescence and then into adulthood. It's much harder to change behaviors in adults than it is to do in children. So that's really the approach we take. And I think there's research that now shows if kids do eat healthy and are physically active, then they are more likely to be physically active and eat healthy when they're older.
The scary thing is that the Wolverhampton gap of 16, I reckon, is a bit lower now. If you look at the school sports survey, it's probably 14. You heard it first here, so let's call that the VZ gap to boost my Google presence. There's something also about relevant curriculum, isn't there? You know, the likelihood of, I know there's my colleagues from Rugby League or ex-colleagues from Rugby League out there in the demo area, but you know, some of these sports, are they really sports for life? You know, are you likely to be able to grab 30 mates for a casual kick around, or is that five-a-side hybrid of football a better option? It took the FA so long to acknowledge that as even being out there. So, you know, Mike, you talked about adaptations of games, didn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is, you know, what children are telling us and young people are telling us, they want the adapted games, and they're so important.